This episode is brought to you by Heron Hill Winery, the official winery of the Hunt Suburbia podcast. Go to www.heronhill.com and use code HS5 for an additional 5% off at checkout. Now, they already have some great volume discounts on there. If you buy 3 bottles, you're going to get 5% off. If you buy 6 bottles, you get 10% off. If you buy 12, you're going to get 15% off. So if you add the 5% extra you get from using code HS5, you get 20% off plus free shipping for a case. HS5 is for first-time buyers. If you're a repeat buyer, you've supported in the past, just get on there and use those volume discounts. Get the wine delivered right to your door. Enjoy a nice glass of wine while you listen to this podcast. There's a lot of great information. And support us. Support the sponsors. We really appreciate it. HeronHill.com. Use code HS5 for an additional 5% or just enjoy their volume discounts. You're listening to the Hunt Suburbia podcast. I'm your host, Pat Guyette. Big bucks I've been dreaming often, every night till I'm in a coffin. Vermont woods to the burbs of Boston, I'm looking for a tree to get lost in. Crisp mornings, little dust in the snow. Quality time, just me and my bow. Fall evenings, I know just where to go for some quality times for me and my bow. It's just me and my bow. This week I interviewed Jason Zimmer from Mass Wildlife. He is the Southeast District Supervisor for 16 years. He's got a background in wildlife biology, earning his master's degree in zoology and physiology from the University of Wyoming. He's done a lot of different studies on various wildlife. He is an avid hunter and fisherman, a really good hunter, I might add. And we start out talking about the proposed license increases from Mass Wildlife, but we get it and where that funding is going, the types of things that the funding is going to be used for. But we talk about a million other things. I couldn't possibly recap it in the intro. So let's just get right into it. Here is Jason Zimmer from Mass Wildlife. All right, another Hunt Suburbia podcast. And I'm sitting here with Jason Zimmer from Mass Wildlife. How you doing, Jason?
Good. How are you?
Good. I really appreciate you coming. There's quite a bit, going on with Mass Wildlife and the proposed price increases and stuff, and a lot of hunters talking about it. So just wanted to make sure that we get somebody on from the agency to talk through some of that stuff. I know not everybody tuned into the listening sessions that you guys had out there, right?
Oh yeah, I'm on all of the social media too, so it's pretty clear when you see some of the comments that people didn't have a chance to tune in or go on the website and see some of the information. So it's good to try and clear it up.
Yeah. We'll go. So Jason, he's the Southeast District Supervisor for 16 years for Mass Wildlife. And he's got a bachelor's degree in wildlife ecology and management from UNH, a master's degree in zoology and physiology from University of Wyoming. And he's studied a bunch of different animals, throughout your schooling, and you wrote your thesis on, pronghorn fetal rates, fetal sex ratios, disease and parasitic impacts, along with the predation rates on fawns for pronghorns. And you've studied captive deer at UNH and wild turkeys. And then even in Norway, you studied moose calf predation by wolves and brown bears. So Jason's got a lot of knowledge and a lot of, wildlife biology knowledge and ecology on top of, being the Southeast District Supervisor for Mass Wildlife. So I just wanted to list the credentials off. This isn't, just the average hunter that we get on here. He's got a lot of background info and knowledge. So really appreciate you coming on.
No, I appreciate being able to come talk to you.
So do you want to talk, tell me about, I'm really curious about these studies. Like what did you learn? Give me like top level on the, the different studies and what you've done with wildlife biology.
Well, when I was, my undergrad at UNH, like, as I mentioned, I got to manage the captive research facility, and we had a herd of probably 30 to 40 captive whitetails, and we'd raise the fawns every year. And it was all part of a thermal regulation study to see their winter energy budgets, and later it transitioned into looking at winter supplemental feeding. One of the students that was there was studying the impacts of that, and that's one of the studies that's point to a lot that kind of discourages people from feeding deer in the winter for a variety of reasons. But
how big was the captive area that they lived in?
we had I think it was about a 10-acre pen, large pen, and then we had a smaller 5-acre one, and then some smaller 1-acre compartments. So, maybe 20 acres all in all.
Yeah. So it wasn't really, there was nothing on movement you could really study or anything like that.
Oh, no. And I mean, any movement would be unnatural because they were fed grain, and, they weren't doing anything really natural other than just, feeding and existing.
So what did you guys end up learning about their energy stores and why it's unsafe to feed?
Well, part of the issue with feeding is that, their gut changes throughout the year. So the type of food that you provide can really throw off their gut and their digestion. Another big issue with it is just simply you're congregating the animals unnaturally. So when you're talking about disease transmission.
Yep.
But we had a thermal, a chamber there where we'd fast the deer for 24 hours and then put them in the chamber. And it really looked at changing the temperature, what their capabilities were to survive without food at different temperature levels. So it helped understand, deer management, particularly in the northern winter range in New Hampshire.
Yeah, because they'll typically go to a wintering yard, right, when there's a lot of snow and, their movement is way down. They're not traveling long distances for food. Yeah. So they're going to need a lot of that, right?
Yeah.
What do you see in Massachusetts in terms of deer wintering yards? Because our winters aren't as severe as, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and the northern territories. Do you find deer wintering yards in the traditional sense that you would find up there?
Not down in the part of the state that I'm from and I cover southeastern Mass. I know that we have some deer wintering areas out in the Berkshires where, the snow depths and the snow conditions get to the point where they're pushed down into certain areas, but I don't see it at all down in southeastern Mass.
Yeah, or the migrations that you hear about that happen way up in the north. That's not really. Yeah.
No, we simply don't get the winters down here to result in that.
What about, and I know we got a list of stuff we'll go through, but just as we're talking here, I'm thinking about the health of, there are a few questions on what Mass Wildlife does to manage habitat for deer, but for wildlife, but, in terms of selective cuts and doing some cutting and maybe some bigger patches of woods or some burns and controlled burns and things like that. Mm-hmm. What have you guys been doing and what do you plan on doing in that?
So in the past, I'd say 5 to 8 years, we've really increased our capacity for active habitat management. So we're managing roughly 2,000 or over 2,000 acres a year, whether it's timber harvest, selective cuts or, patch clear cuts, understory mowing, prescribed fire, herbicide applications, and a variety of other techniques. So we have a statewide management goal to create a certain percentage of, early successional young forest, which it doesn't only benefit deer, it benefits, a whole host of not only game species, but non-game species. So we've committed to try and manage at least 2,000 acres a year, and we're pushing things in the direction of having, I think it's 10% grassland, a certain percent shrubland, a certain percent young forest, and then all the way up to, some kind of reserves that aren't touched to allow to go to old growth.
Yeah. And what do you do in your zone, which, isn't the typical big chunks of woods you're going to find in western and some central Mass areas? What do you think, how do you guys manage a habitat? And we'll talk deer for now. What's a good deer habitat there and how can you manage it and improve it?
We don't do a whole heck of a lot of focused deer management down here. It's more, we're focusing on the biodiversity and ecosystem, but it benefits deer. So, for example, we do a lot of prescribed fire. So down in the Cape and parts of Plymouth County, we're doing a lot of fire and planning to do more fire to benefit those early successional young forest habitats in your pitch pine, scrub oak barrens. We've got a pretty significant project going on all around the southern end of working cooperatively with DCR, the southern end of Miles Standish State Forest, our Southeast Pine Barrens WMA, Maple Springs WMA, and a conservation restriction we hold on Camp Catchalot, where we've thinned the overstory probably 75 to 80%, and mowing the understory, which not only is it going to lead to better young forest habitat and pitch pine scrub oak, but also there's a big wildfire hazard there. So we're working to reduce the risk of wildfire that threatens homes and habitats down there. Because back in the, I don't know if it was 58 or back in the 50s sometime, there was a big catastrophic fire that burned all the way to the ocean, tens of thousands of acres. So,
wow.
And it's part of the area was primed for that type of thing to happen again.
When that happens, even though, it can be tragic, but it does end up rebounding pretty good, right? And it creates a new forest and new undergrowth.
Yeah, and a lot of our ecosystems were fire dependent in some way. And if you look like out in the western part of the U.S., where you have big fires out in Yellowstone, California, it may be catastrophic at the time, but the habitat does benefit in the long run from it.
Yep, that's good. All right, so before we jump into the whole, we'll do a deep dive on the proposed license increases and fees, and like where that money's going, and you can educate people on that, since a lot of us, and I'm guilty of it too, didn't tune into the listening session. But so I think a big word that I haven't seen anybody address yet is that it's proposed. It's a proposed license fee increase. That doesn't mean that it is set in stone, right?
No, absolutely not. I mean, it's a proposal at this point. It hasn't even gone to public hearing. So we did the 3 public informational sessions to just get the information out to the public. And then the last board meeting is when our director proposed the list of, actually the proposed changes in the fees. But it's just a proposal. So then the process is it'll go to a public hearing at some point. And at that point, the public can offer their comments, and we take under advisement any of the comments, discuss it internally, and then come back and present maybe a revised proposal to the board, taking into consideration comments.
Yep.
That happens with any regulatory change. It's the same process that we go through. And there certainly is room for change, and we encourage people, and we have been encouraging people to comment. Don't just wait for the public hearing. We have that online form. You can send emails to the agency. And I know I was talking to Director Tiza today. He is planning on going out and doing probably 4 or 5 more of those public informational sessions, giving the presentation, and then soliciting further feedback. I think he's going to do like 1 a week in the evenings, just to provide more opportunity, because it became clear, like, we can see how many people tune into those on Zoom, or I think he did it on Zoom. And it, in the grand scheme of things, in terms of our sports hunting and fishing population, not a lot of people tuned in. So the information didn't get out as widely as we wanted it to. And then you see on Facebook and other places, people took a screenshot of the fees, posted it on there, and then just people gut react to it because they don't have any of the background information. And it is shocking to look at an increase when we haven't had one in so long. Yeah,
and a lot of gut reactions, just by nature, a lot of times are just not, they're not the best reactions, and it doesn't look great on everybody a lot of the time. So I want to make sure that we talk in depth about it and get the right information out. Now, how does it go from proposed to set in stone? You're gonna take everybody's comments and thoughts into consideration from the public hearings, but it's not like it goes to a public vote. You guys are gonna listen to everybody's feedback and then have other meetings and decide, all right, well, maybe it's not, maybe we don't increase it this much, or maybe this stamp doesn't go that high and this one does, right? What happens after the public hearing?
So, I mean, what typically happens is we'll take the public comment at the hearing and all the emails and everything that comes in. And to take a step back a little bit, the proposed license fee and, the actual fees themselves, the proposed fees, that came about from, over a year-long in-depth analysis that our director did with our Fisheries and Wildlife Board subcommittee on agency finances. So they reviewed everything that has to do with our agency finances and looking at predictions and the trends and where things are going before they came up with those fees. So those fees were really designed with the intended need to have our revenue be more than our expenses, so that we're not upside down. And we'll obviously get into that a little bit more, but there's certainly some room for tweaking of things. But at the end of the day, like with any business or anything like that, the revenues have to be more than your expenses or you're out of business.
Yep.
And that's really what the end game has to be.
Yeah, I think people just want to know, get a better insight into what the expenses are and the revenues. And, I don't know how much of that you can share today or how much the agency is going to want to share. But I think that's just what people want to know. Like, if we're going to be spending X amount more per year and we get it, and I'm all for an increase too. I'm one of the sportsmen that, of course, like if it's going to go back into, making hunting better and making the lands that we all enjoy better and all the opportunities better, like why wouldn't I, right? I would donate money to that type of a cause, but I want to know, where it's going to go, right? Just like I wish with the taxes that everybody pays that we could select, if we're paying X amount of taxes through every year, I want this amount to go to education. I want this. Obviously, that's a fairy tale land.
Yeah.
But I think with something like this, if you can just break down where some of the price increases and the additional revenue is going to go, like what was the result of the study that the director did, and if you can just elaborate on that a little bit.
So, I guess to try and take a little step back, we haven't had a license increase since 1996. So.
Right.
Myself included, because I'm an avid hunter, but we've been paying the same cost for everything since that time. And in 26 years, a lot's changed. I mean, I was a freshman in college at UNH back the last time we increased licenses. And, to kind of reflect back on the presentation that Director Tiza gave, Google wasn't around, Amazon wasn't around, people didn't have cell phones.
Yep.
The cost of everything has gone up through that time period just through inflation. But our agency has changed and done a lot in that time too. So the amount of land we had back at that time was 80 some odd thousand acres. We now have over 226,000 acres. And that comes, with a cost, not just the cost of acquisition, but added stewardship costs and management costs and building parking areas and maintaining those areas. And we've also increased the number of days to hunt, for a number of species over that time period. We've added programs that the sporting community have asked for, like youth programs, the youth pheasant program, the youth turkey program. We added the youth deer day. We've increased and improved our hunter education program. We've added some learn to hunt or skills type programs, like the learn to hunt programs. I'm not sure if you're aware of those, but I'm involved in those pretty significantly. And like learn to deer hunt. There's a field dressing and processing one. We do the teaching with trout program, national archeries in the school program. So we've done a lot of new things that the sportsmen have asked for over that time. But it really boils down to to look at where our money comes from. So about half of our money comes from hunting, fishing, trapping, licenses, stamps, and permits. The other half roughly comes from federal aid reimbursement. I know Chris Borgatti from BHA was mentioning that last week. That's the Pittman-Robertson funds and the Wallop-Bro funds. So that's basically the two 50% of our revenue. And the reason why we're in this situation, we're talking about a license increase, is our revenue has declined through that time. And that's due to a variety of factors. One is number of hunting licenses have declined. I
saw that we're down 50% from
hunting
26 years ago.
Licenses are down 50% since 96, and sporting licenses are down 20%. So fishing stayed pretty
more
stable.
Yeah.
And then we also have had, you mentioned, I think, whether it was discussing before or during the podcast, I can't recall, but the aging demographic of our sporting community. So we've had more and more of our hunters and fishermen age into that free license category. And that free license category for the 70 and over is an unfunded state mandate. So those free licenses are free. We don't get reimbursed for it from the general fund, whereas the half price licenses for 65 to 69, we do get reimbursed for those. So we're made whole for that lost.
And from the general fund, you mean like the other 50%, the Pittman-Robertson?
No, I'm talking from general fund,
Okay.
state general fund.
Yep.
And then we also had, I think back in 2012, another unfunded state mandate, the free minor fishing license. And to give you an idea of what that entails, I think last year we issued 27,000 of those 70 and over free licenses. and another 7,000 free minor fishing licenses. And then you add on top of that, there's a handful of other free licenses that we give out that none of those are reimbursed. So that's about $1 million of lost revenue annually.
Just when someone goes from 69 to 70 years old, right?
Yep, correct.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, and that's yeah. So how do you solve that? How do we solve that without a price increase on everybody else, if there's any?
I don't think, honestly. I mean, we've been in a situation since, that 2013 to 2015 timeframe where the expenses exceeded our revenue. So our bills exceeded our revenue. So I don't think that $1 million alone would do it for sure. But it would certainly help.
How long did you say that the expenses?
Since roughly, it was right teetering on that border, 2013 to 2015, and now it's just the two things are going in opposite directions.
Why do you think we didn't start a price increase or a gradual one then? Once that first year that the expenses exceeded revenue.
So it's, I can't really say why we didn't. I wasn't the director. I'm not the director at the time. One thing that plays into things there is we still had a significant amount of money in the Inland Fish and Game Fund. So that's where our money goes.
That's like your reserve, right?
But that's where, it goes up when the federal aid and our license sales go in, and then goes down with the bills that we have to pay. But when you have a lot of money in that fund, it's a tough thing to go out and ask for a license increase. Certainly, I mean, I've heard people say, why didn't you just do it incrementally over the years? Anything like that takes legislation to do, like to set one where it just automatically goes up, like to follow inflation.
Yeah.
But certainly, our director now, from the day he was appointed, he knew that this was a priority, and he started the process. So going back, this has been a process that was set in motion starting back in 2018. And we just recently got the approval to go out and start talking to people about it, giving the information about it. So you can see how slow sometimes things work in government and bureaucracy, but
yeah,
it's something that was put in motion. And certainly I've heard the same thing too. Like, what about the timing? Is we're just coming towards the tail end of a global pandemic.
Yep.
It's inevitable. We just got approval to talk about it, and it came up, and it's inevitable that we have to do it because things take time. And with that analysis that the director and subcommittee did, with the expenses increasing so much and the revenue decreasing, our agency is going to be out of money and not be able to operate sometime in fiscal year 25. So.
In a way, COVID-19 has been a blessing for the outdoor industry, though, right? And for sport, it's almost like it's forcing recruitment. There are so many people that are interested in just getting into hunting now. And I don't know that, someone who just started hunting this year and paid $56 or whatever mass has traditionally been for the full license. And, maybe if they weren't successful, didn't see many deer. As many people who are just starting out, they're going to run into that, right? They're not going to see a million deer. A lot of those guys, I think, maybe they're not going to rebuy a license with a huge fee increase. So I don't know. It's just something to think about. How do you manage new hunters a little bit differently? Maybe there's some kind of a break that can be considered for someone who is new. And then another question I have is so the Pittman-Robertson Act. Pittman-Robertson, right? Robertson.
Yeah.
That act. Are they counting the 70 and over when they're deciding like what funds to distribute?
No.
So it's only if they bought a license.
It's only licenses that are paid for are counted towards that. But in the grand scheme of things, we're a minimum state. So what that means is we get the minimum. So it's based off your land area, your population, and the number of licenses you sell. So our agency would need to sell, I think it's something like another 70,000 hunting licenses on top of what we do, and we don't even sell 70,000 right now.
To even make one more
and
dollar
another
from
330,000 fishing licenses to get out of being a minimum state. So it's
okay.
That wouldn't, getting reimbursed for the free licenses from the general fund wouldn't help in that regard, but it would certainly help our overall budget situation.
What if you made what if you made a license $1 for new hunters or fishermen? The first year it's $1, and is it like, do they care about how much, or is it just like if somebody buys a license, then it counts?
I don't,
because I'm just thinking, how do we get a bunch of new hunters in, and maybe not make the new hunters, have to pay because our whole point, you want to have sustained growth. You want to get somebody in to buy a license when they're 18, and then you want them to buy a license all the way until they're 70, right? Mm-hmm. And we want that in Massachusetts. So how do we get those more younger people into the system?
I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think there's a couple things there. So for the new hunters that maybe just got into it this year, I doubt that they're going all in and buying, a bear tag, a turkey tag, 2 doe permits, a waterfowl stamp. So I don't know whether the cost whether it's cost prohibitive really. Mm-hmm. And in terms of recruiting new hunters, we see, everybody always talked about youth programs, and, I love the youth programs and I think it's important, but we see more growth of new hunters in, honestly, people my age, your age, that have gotten out of school, settled down a little bit, have a little bit of a expendable income, and they're the ones that seem to be, that's where we see the biggest growth of new hunters. And I don't necessarily see that the cost of things, even with the proposed license increase, is going to be a huge impact. I know, historically, if you look at any state that's raised their license fees, there's always a little bit of a drop. So that was taken into consideration when they did the analysis. You're going to have a little bit of a drop, and then it usually normalizes, or, it might not come back to the old level, but it normalizes at some point, not too far below it. So,
I talk about it all the time. One thing that is awesome about hunting is that there's so many different ways that you can hunt. You can always keep your hunt fresh by using different weapons or hunting in different seasons. Some state has an early season, some have a late season. You can hunt a buck here and a doe there, and a Saturday here and a Sunday there. Well, one of the easiest ways to change up your hunt, if you haven't got into muzzleloader hunting yet, muzzleloader is a great way to extend your season. In New Hampshire, it's early, before the rifle season, before the bow season. In Vermont, it's late, it's at the end. But muzzleloader hunting is awesome. And so I'm super excited to announce a partnership with Woodman Arms Muzzleloader. This muzzleloader actually shoots like a rifle too. And the coolest part about Woodman Arms is they recommend that you not clean your gun. You don't need to clean this thing. If you're using Blackhorn 209 powder, you don't need to clean it. Yeah. Now muzzleloaders are the messiest guns out there. You're shooting powder that's either loosely packed or in a pellet, and just imagine lighting that thing on fire in there. It's an extremely messy thing, but with the Woodman Arms, the way they build it, you don't need to clean that muzzleloader. That's number one selling point in the world. But once you hold this thing, it feels like a rifle. It just feels right in your hands. It's got a hammerless action, so there's absolutely no hammer on the gun. It's got a crossbolt safety. It feels like you're carrying your 7600 through the woods. I'm extremely excited about this partnership. They're making me a gun right now. Throughout the summer as I'm shooting it and into the fall and getting ready, I'll report back on how it shoots, but you don't have to look any further than all the reviews and all the really great hunters in the Northeast and across the country. Really, they're selling all over the country because they're the best muzzleloader in the country. Look at what everybody else is saying about this gun. That's enough for me to endorse it without ever shooting one, but I can't wait to shoot one and follow up with you guys and tell you how it is this summer, this fall. For now, go to woodmanarms.com. Check them out. You can build your own custom gun right there. Call Timmy Bolduc, who was on this podcast and is a good friend of mine, and he'll tell you anything that you need to know about the gun. Woodman Arms, America's most accurate and dependable muzzleloader on the market, handcrafted in New Hampshire. Go to woodmanarms.com and start building your gun today. Yeah, and I do want to put it into perspective. It's not like you're saying, $160 I believe is what the proposed increase would be if you hunted everything. I was just looking on the site. It would end up being $160. I mean, you look across the entire country, that's not that bad. But I want to say that with all due respect to really hardworking hunters out there who work 60 hours a week. They might only get one day a year to hunt, and they don't have as much expendable income. There's a lot of those guys out there too, you know. But putting it into perspective, and then I want to read a quote. One of our listeners sent in. He grew up in Mass and learned to hunt here, but then moved to Maine. And this is what he said. He said, "I started listening to your podcast a couple weeks ago. Great listen. I lived in Ayr, Central Mass until I was 18, and I've been in Maine the last 20. I know people are upset about license hikes, but overall, it's still cheap and a steal for $2 in long seasons. You guys are so lucky in Massachusetts. There are WMAs all over the place. My father lives in Royalston, more than half the town's a WMA. In Maine, we hardly have any. I know we have the big woods, and that's where my heart is, but it's still all technically private land, and someday, hopefully not in my lifetime, it will turn into leases or clubs. If landowners wanted to close it to hunting tomorrow, they could. Look at Roxanne Quimby's land that became a monument. In central Maine, where I live, we have great bucks, but it's all posted private land, and shooting great bucks around here is more related to what land you have versus how good of a hunter you are. I would gladly pay more license fees if I knew some of the money at least was going to public lands. I know it sucks feeling like you're a criminal in Mass, hunting in the suburbs, but you guys are so lucky there. Lots of WMAs. It's easy to forget that. In December, I went back to Mass to track some, and I looked at Onyx. I couldn't believe how much more WMA land there was compared to 20 years ago when I grew up hunting there. So just putting it into perspective, guys from other states, we do have a lot of WMAs, and like you said, Mass Wildlife has increased it from 80,000 to 220,000 acres over 26 years, right? Yep. There's a lot of good there, but I think people just want to know, like, where's the money going to be going to, right? With these increases, is it going to go into habitat management? Is it going to go to hiring new, employees and resources to help maintain the lands, improvements on the parking areas? Like, can you talk a little bit about the buckets on where the agency is looking to spend the new revenue?
Yeah. So in general terms, it's the reason for the license increase is so that we can continue to operate our agency in the way that we have been doing. So do all of the land acquisition, land management, habitat programs, educational programs, everything that we do, our core functions and all the programs that we provide. That's what the money goes towards. To give you a little bit better breakdown, and I'm trying to remember off the top of my head here, but something like 10% of our expenses goes to administration, maybe 35-40% to fisheries and wildlife management programs. I think it's something like 14% goes to operation of our hatcheries across the state. Maybe 3% to our pheasant and quail program, 2% to hunter ed. The big one, I'm forgetting one, but the big one that is one of the main reasons why our expenses have increased is the state mandated costs that we don't have any control over. So I'm talking payroll taxes, health insurance benefits, things like that, that we don't have control over. And those probably more even so than inflation have driven our expenses to go above our revenues, coupled with the declines in sales. So.
Yeah, because I think inflation's been like it's 65 or 75%, right?
Yeah, it's like between 65 and 70%.
Yeah. But so the state mandated stuff that can change every year, and they can increase.
It increases every year.
Yeah. All right. So that's good to hear, I guess, that so it's like operating the agency at the level that you have been operating at, and you need some more funds to make up for the state mandated increases, the inflation. But what are there any programs that you're going to add, or is there anything in the works right now that you're going to add, or this is literally, it's like we want to be able to maintain what we've been doing, and you have been doing a great job, as evidenced by the increase in land and all of that stuff, the extension of the seasons. So is that fair? It's like you just want to be able to maintain at least that level of service. I think it said for a decade when I read online this fund, the increase in fees would extend the agency's life by a decade, right?
Yeah, that's the intended purpose. And to say that we're not going to add anything or do anything new, we're constantly doing that. So I tried to point out, like, we added a bunch in the past 26 years off of a license increase in 96. That same thing, it was only supposed to get us another 10 years, but we have been very fiscally responsible with the hunters and anglers' money over that time. Otherwise, we wouldn't have made it as far as we did. And our director's done a great job of being fiscally responsible and doing things to cut back a little bit to make sure that we're eking things out as long as we possibly can. This revenue or proposed license increase, yes, it's supposed to get us another 10 years, help us keep doing all the programs that we currently do, but we are still going to continue to buy land. We're going to continue to improve access. We've done a lot in the past 5 years in particular to build new parking areas, better maintain our parking areas with some funding for gravel and things like that. So we're doing a lot to try and provide more access and opportunity to the public. And we're also working pretty heavily with towns and other agencies in the state like DCR. So we've worked very closely with DCR to open areas to hunting like the Blue Hills, Wachusett, and we're actively working on other ones right now to improve hunter access and opportunity. And then similar to the Hopkinton thing you mentioned, we do proactively go into a lot of towns and give presentations on deer management, especially where we know, eastern Massachusetts, where we have high densities of deer. We need to get in and try and manage the deer and get better hunter access in those towns. But we also have a lot of hunters density in those towns, so to provide that opportunity. So we're going to continue to do all these things. We're going to continue to improve, hunting and fishing access moving forward. But at the end of the day, bare bones, this is talking about keeping our agencies head above water so we can continue to do our mandated conservation work.
Yeah, awesome. And so one of my questions was going to be, so inside the 495 belt, right, where there are a lot of towns that, are prohibiting hunting through one bylaw or another, and that's where we're seeing the highest, populations of deer and all the problems that come along with that. What are some of the things besides, and I love that you guys are proactively going to towns and lobbying for hunters, and hopefully that'll show some improvements on hunting opportunity here, but are there other things inside the 495 belt that we can do to increase hunter access?
I mean, it's tough in there because, as you mentioned, there are a lot of towns that have passed, I think Northeast, Boston, Northeast, there's a higher density of towns that have passed these bylaws and ordinances than anywhere else in the state. So that makes it difficult. There's not a lot of land available, so in terms of land acquisition, it's difficult. So aside from us proactively working with towns, and we have successfully done it in a number of towns, worked with them to open some of their lands. Maybe it's just archery hunting that they do at first, but we've worked with them to get those programs in place. And
which towns?
You had to ask me. They're mostly in that inside the kind of the 128 belt. I don't even know. They're mostly in the Northeast District, and I haven't actually been involved with them.
Yep.
But aside from doing that, the only other thing that's going to open up hunting access in those areas would have to be a reduction in the setbacks for discharge of a firearm or release of an arrow. And I know that there's been bills proposed for this, so that's a legislative thing. I don't know if we'll get into that, but that would open up more hunting access because the town that I live in, I think there's 85 to 90% of it's closed just due to the 500-foot buffer from roads, from houses, excuse me.
I mean, the two things that I hear over and over again to talk about is when can we expect Sunday hunting to ever open up, and the setbacks, reducing the setbacks. And that is, I think, especially important for suburban hunting and inside the 495 belt. Reducing the setback would do numbers on allowing hunters to harvest more deer. Yeah. Also, there's that theory that if a setback, the longer the distance a setback is, so 500 feet or 1,000 feet, like Hopkinton was thinking about amending their bylaw to, then you're getting further away from houses, but it's a better chance that you're turning around and aiming back towards the houses as opposed to like setting up, looking into the woods, right? Mm-hmm. And so like projectiles are going back toward the houses, the bigger you make the setback, right? Whereas if the setback was very close, you can get close to a house. You're shooting away from houses, away from people, and into the woods.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly would open up more opportunity. And I've heard a lot about people wanting to reduce the archery setback in particular because it's, in the past, I think it was like 2018 or 2019 was the first year that the archery kill exceeded the shotgun kill, and it's becoming more and more of a tool in Eastern Massachusetts. And for whatever reason, because of the stigma around firearms or whatever, it seems to be more acceptable to the general public that doesn't hunt. So
yeah, and it's like the extended season is a huge thing. Like that's why I got into archery, to be able to hunt a lot more days.
Yeah.
But that's a statute, and that has to go through legislation.
Yeah, so that somebody has to file a bill, and it has to get, all the way through the legislature, through the House and the Senate, and voted in to be able to change that.
What are some things that, regulations that Mass Wildlife has the ability to set and change?
So if you just do a little bit of research and just, Google Mass General Laws and Google Code of Massachusetts Regulations, you can see and go through all of them. So I think the Mass General Laws 131 are the ones that typically apply to hunting and fishing. There's a couple other ones that deal with discharge, but those are the main ones. And then 321 CMR are the ones that Mass Wildlife has the ability to change. So regulation changes, those happen either internally because we see something and bring it up through our senior staff and bring it to our Fisheries and Wildlife Board. And for those people that don't know, we're overseen by a Fisheries and Wildlife Board. They set regulations. We advise them based on the best scientific management practices. They actually are the voting body that makes and sets regulations.
How many people are on the board?
7.
And where do they come from? Is it an elected position?
They're appointed. I believe the word is appointed, but basically there's a representative for all the 5 districts, so regionally, and then we have a professional wildlife biologist representative and a representative that speaks for agriculture.
Okay. And are they generally mostly hunters and fishermen or outdoors people? Or
for the most part, hunters or anglers or professional biologists, conservation type individuals.
Are there any regulations that you're aware of that that Mass Wildlife is thinking about changing?
We've been talking about some, and the ones that we hear about, one in particular, relative to pheasant, we've heard a lot about there's a rule where you can only shoot male pheasants on the islands and inside the either 495 or 128 corridor. So that's one of the regulations that I know we've been looking at. We hear a lot about pellet or air rifles, and we're trying to, do a review and determine exactly how those are, where they fit in the current laws, or if there's regulations that apply or need to apply to those. I can't think of anything other, any other major ones off the top of my head. We just changed the turkey regulations recently and expanded the season and added a 3rd tag. So we're constantly looking at things, but I can't think of anything major off the top of my head.
I know I've got some questions here from listeners that, I was going to do a segment where we go through all of them, but as we're talking about some stuff, and I know that there are, I'll pick some out. So from Bowsight, Spike78 said, please ask him about the rule regarding not being able to use dead coyote shotgun loads for fox and bobcat, as it makes no sense when you can use an elephant gun for them. So are you aware of that regulation?
Yeah, there is a regulation. I think it's in the 321 CMR, and it relates to waterfowl. And I know that for a time you couldn't use those for coyotes either. And there was a review back in 2005 on the coyote regulations where it was requested to use some larger shot size for coyote, and that was added in at that time. So that regulation that pertains to those shot sizes was amended at that time for coyotes in particular, because it was a coyote review. But it was never addressed or brought up relative to any other species.
So it sounds like, he's, I think, I don't know anything about fox and bobcat hunting or the dead coyote shotgun loads or anything, but it sounds like he's asking about, because, if you can use a giant caliber gun on fox and bobcat, why can't you use the dead coyote shotgun? Do you know?
I don't think there's any particular reason. It just never was brought up in the past.
So that's something that potentially could get.
Potentially, yeah. But with any regulation, anywhere, I mean, you need to think about what opening up a regulation does in the grand scheme of things. So we say that was brought up, and we start talking about bobcat regulations.
Yeah.
If you look at take New Hampshire for example, they were proposing a bobcat season. And it's a possibly controversial topic to even get talking about various hunting seasons. So that's just something to take into consideration. But one of the things is we haven't heard from people that that's something that they want. I mean, that's the first I've heard of anybody even mentioning that as something that they would want.
And one thing I was going to say earlier is hunters are guilty of not, we like to, there's a lot of comments that happen in our forums and in our groups, right? And when we get together, we talk about it, but we're guilty of not taking that extra step to, reach, make our voices heard to not only like Mass Wildlife, any agency that affects hunting, but like your local politicians or your state reps and all the people that need to hear about this stuff. We don't do that enough. So anybody who did send me a comment or a question to ask here should absolutely send it to Mass Wildlife. You'll find their email. Do you know what the email is, top of your head? You can find it online. I could just
give them mine. I mean, I love this type of stuff. I encourage people to reach out to me because that's part of what I should be doing as a public servant.
Yep.
But any of these questions, a lot of the nuanced questions about shot sizes and things like that, 90% of the time you're going to find out that there's a statute, and that's the reason why it is what it is. And we've had to, create our regulations around a statute that exists.
Which is a state law, right?
Yeah, it's a state law that can only be stricken or amended by legislation, by a bill passing through the legislature.
Okay, so while we're on that note, another question from Instagram, East Coast Adventures. Why can't we use artificial light for coyote at night, and why are we restricted to calibers?
Statute? Yeah.
Do you know what particular statutes?
What
does the statute say? It just says...
It says that you can't have a firearm a rifle above a certain caliber between half an hour after sunset and half an hour before sunrise. And then the light says you cannot use artificial lights for hunting other species other than like raccoon and opossum.
We don't really need to get. I mean, you didn't write the statutes, right? So I can't.
No, and I have they were all created long before my time.
I was going to ask you why is it just those two? Raccoons and possums. But it's not really worth getting into it. You don't have the answer to that.
No.
We'll do a couple more questions and then jump back. But while we're on it, so Bow Hunter 1743, Kevin from Instagram. What are the rules for legally posting property? Can you go over the guidelines on that? And do they have to be certain distances apart, signed yearly, etc.? No,
that's a common misconception that they have to be certain distances apart. And I'm probably going to misstate the law, but I think it's 131.36. And it says basically that the land has to be conspicuously posted bearing the name of the owner or tenant, and say that it's off limits to hunting, fishing, or trapping, whatever the case may be. So it's a little bit up to interpretation of a law enforcement officer what conspicuous is. But what I've always told people is if you're walking into the property from any direction and you can see a sign that says posted, that's conspicuous. If you walk on somewhere and you can't see a sign anywhere, then you probably have a case to made that you didn't know. But if you walk onto that property from any direction across the boundary and you see a sign, it's posted legally.
All right. Another one that kind of goes on what we were talking about last question is, so why can't, this is from DF Hunt 7 on Instagram, why can't the Traditions Nitro Fire muzzleloader be used during the Massachusetts muzzleloader season?
So that's, I mean, these type of things come up all the time because the muzzleloader game changes the technology changes so quickly. The only answer I can give is from my understanding, the creation of the primitive firearm season and the intent behind that season, and I think it even says it in the regulation, is that it was, meant to be a season in line with like what our forefathers, experienced. And so as the technology's gotten more and more advanced, it takes a little bit out of the, the challenge or the, kind of the chance that, the flint might not go off, the powder might not burn, things like that. That's the only explanation I can give. But, again, maybe I've heard from one or two people over the years that, why can't I use this? Like, I think there was Remington came out with one, or one of them came out with one that was basically, it wasn't actually a muzzle loader. Like, they marketed it as a muzzle loader, but the primer, powder, and projectile were all loaded in like a plastic case that looked like kind of like a shotgun shell, and then you stick it in the back, and it was marketed as a muzzle loader. But it takes a little bit away from the intent of what the experience is supposed to be.
The manual process of loading and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So do you know what the line is there? Like for future muzzleloaders, I know. So Woodman Arms, have you heard about them in New Hampshire? And I love those guys. And that muzzleloader is coming up, and a lot of talk around it. And they're actually an official partner of the podcast now. But do you know where the line is? Like, what is it that... Is it just the loading mechanism and making sure that there's still a manual loading? Is it the way the barrels are created? Where do you think the line is there?
I think the line is it has to load from the muzzle, and it has to have a flint or cap. So that's where you get they consider the primer a cap still.
Yep.
And not have electronic ignition. Yep. So that I think the electronic ignition thing was talked about. There was a CVA one, I think, that had an electronic ignition going back a few years ago, and that was, for one reason or another, it was decided not to allow those. And again, getting back to, I think it gets away from a little bit of the intent of what the season is supposed to be like. But
does it say anything like that in the archery for archery seasons? That you want to keep, because every technology is just going to continue to keep advancing. We're always going to have discussions around what is too much,
Yeah. Well, yeah, they've got that. It's like a shotgun that shoots an arrow.
I saw. Yeah, it's the new crossbows.
The double arrow crossbow.
Yeah, there was something crazy like that I saw the other day. While we're on the subject of crossbows, and I'm sure you guys hear this one all the time too. Yep. Why? And I know the intent for has to be a permanent disability. But have you guys thought about somebody who has a minor, injury or something that's going to, they'd have to sit out a year hunting if they couldn't pick up a crossbow, or bow hunting. Is there any consideration for rewriting that regulation in the future, or is that a statute?
That's a statute. Again, and I was in that situation probably 3 or 4 years ago. I hurt my shoulder pretty bad. It wasn't like a major injury, but I couldn't pull back a bow. So I wasn't, I bow hunt right through the end of December. Yep. Anyways, like I mentioned earlier, I do pick up the shotgun and muzzleloader too, but I love bow hunting so much, I'll still bow hunt right through, and I couldn't do it, and it had me thinking, man, it would be nice to pick up a crossbow, but again, that's a statute that needs a bill to change, and there was a big push to try and change it last year, but it didn't pass. And it's tough because, even within the hunting community, not everybody's on the same page with allowing crossbows.
Yep.
Honestly, especially, strictly archery hunters. There's some divide there. So it's a tricky topic. And I heard anecdotally through people who had reached out to their legislators and gotten responses back that the legislators said themselves that we heard from hunters that didn't want crossbows too. So it's tough. I mean, but again, it's a bill.
All right, just want to take a quick break and remind everybody that's listening, please, if you haven't, go on to iTunes or the podcast app, anywhere that you can leave a review on the podcast. iTunes and the Apple Podcast app are the best places to do so because it really helps in the rankings. Go in there, leave a written review, tap on the 5-star rating. That's going to help us a lot in shooting up the rankings and getting this podcast out to more people, and I would really greatly appreciate that. Go and subscribe on our YouTube page if you haven't yet. It's Hunt Suburbia, youtube.com/Hunt Suburbia. Of course, follow us on all of our social medias. Continue to interact with us, and if you have any questions or anything you want to send me, shoot me an email at huntsuburbia@gmail.com. Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be tricky with bills, but if so, something Chris Borgatti said on the last podcast, use that tool and get on and search for hunting to see what statutes are being considered all across the state, and if there's one that you want to support, make sure that you're supporting it by letting your state rep know and sending emails and being vocal. Yeah, I guess that's all I can say. I don't know. There might be a similar crossbow statute being considered again this year, but we'll just have to look it up. All right, so another topic. So has Mass Wildlife considered additional revenue streams from non-sportsmen? So I've seen Georgia has a state lands pass that you got to buy, but it's included with your hunting and fishing license. But if you're not hunting or fishing, there's a state lands pass for like $25 or something that you get access to all the state lands. So have you heard that one before? And has it been considered?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're hearing about that a lot right now, but we've heard about that all along, and it's something we've talked about internally. Again, that's something that would have to be established through the legislature to create something like that, and it's a pretty good. Well, there's a couple things I want to touch on when you bring something like that up. One is oftentimes right in the same breath when I hear hunters talk about that. They're referencing something like, quote, so all these people that don't pay for the land can pay their share. In reality, when we're buying our wildlife management areas, less than 20% of the money we spend on those comes from hunting and fishing license sales.
It comes from general funds.
The other 80% is from bond funds. It's all general funds, so taxpayer funds, if you want to just put it in one little bubble.
Yep.
So the general public is paying the lion's share for our wildlife management area. So they are paying their share to acquire those properties. Certainly ongoing management and things like that are paid for more by sportsmen for sure.
But in fairness, the sportsman's getting double dipped on it. They're paying the general tax as well, and then also the 20%.
Right.
So there is some room where they have an argument because the people who are not hunting and fishing aren't paying as much, when it comes down to percentages.
Right. Yeah, and there's probably a discussion there between consumptive use versus a non-consumptive use and all that. But
taking from the land versus people who are passively using it.
I think the bigger and more important narrative there is, it's clear, and this isn't an issue just in Massachusetts, across the country, the funding model that has funded conservation for decades, where it comes from sportsmen, hunting and angling license and stamp sales, it's not sustainable in the long run. So it's not something that we can rely on in perpetuity, and it needs to change. We need to find a new funding model that is more consistent and sustainable into the future, and that is going to be one where everybody pays. And there's been states that have accomplished that in some way. You mentioned Georgia. Some good examples are like Missouri, where they passed a percentage of the state, or an increase in the state sales tax of like 1/10 of 1%. Another state did one that was like 1/8 of 1%, and you have no idea how much money that actually means to fund conservation. So
is that sales of everything, or just like
no? That's the general sales tax. But then there's also states that have done just what you were, I think, getting to, is they've created a little bit of, or taken a little bit of the existing sales tax on sporting goods. So basically like a state version of Pittman-Robertson.
Yeah. And then that's where you could like put it on mountain bikes and kayaks and.
Yep. Yeah. So then that would go in, that's a model where you could get that to go directly into, or some portion of it to go directly into the Inland Fish and Game Fund, where it's protected and it can't be diverted elsewhere. And it could be, that would long-term sustain our agency's operation into the future without having to continually come back to the sportsman and ask for more money. The issue with those is, and if you look at any of the reports or data on those, is, and a couple others to mention, is like lottery. Some states have a portion of the lottery goes towards the state, or a special license plate, or a tax checkoff. We have a tax checkoff for endangered species conservation, but any of those things, they require legislative process, and they do require broad public support. So it's not typically not a 2, 3, 4, 5 year process to get that through. It takes a grassroots campaign, partnerships and collaboration between all conservation groups. I'm talking like trustees of reservations, Mass Audubon, land trusts, town conservation groups, all getting together and supporting something because they know it's going to benefit everyone. So
sounds like we need to start doing that now.
Yeah, and we're already thinking that and working on that, but it's going to take a while. We can't wait for that process to happen. That's why we're talking about the license fee increase. But the recognition there has to be that what we do is for everyone. So our conservation work is for everyone in the Commonwealth. The programs, the habitat we protect, at the end of the day, you're talking about like clean air, clean water, healthy environment, healthy habitats, healthy wildlife populations. That's important to everybody's well-being.
Yep.
So the more and more that narrative gets out there, and the idea that we need to start shifting towards a new funding model that takes money from elsewhere, that's consistent, to where we don't have to always go back to the hunting and fishing community to fund everything that we do is really where things need to go in the future.
Yeah, and I think, it's just people just want a sense that it's fair. They just want to feel that everything is fair and everything's all balanced and right. And even though the point's taken that 80% of the new land purchases and stuff are coming from general taxpayer, there is that double dipping thing. So I just think as long as we're moving towards something like that, something that comes to mind is Brian Visco, I've had on the podcast. He's a big angler and hunter, and he keeps bringing up that the ramps are that he has to pay extra fees for. Through registration and stuff like that, for his, motorboats. They're jammed up with, car toppers, kayakers. I love kayak fishing myself. I'm a kayak fisherman. I just love being able to sneak in anywhere quietly with the kayaks. But they're kind of like jamming up the boat ramps sometimes. And, that's at the expense of somebody who's paying, through registration to use it. So there's like little things like that, could be considered in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And we certainly, when we hear about or know about those issues, particularly the car top access, or where we have trailer access, where you're talking about the registration fees, we try to work with our Office of Fishing and Boating Access to add on to those properties, to build more parking where it's needed, and add trailer only places to try and deal with that. But again,
and you see signs that say car top access, here, I've seen those in multiple places.
Yeah. And some of that comes down to enforcement, and it's tough. We don't do enforcement, but that's done by the environmental police. But it's a difficult situation, but we try and address it where we can.
Remind me, I want to get into environmental police a little later and just like where they fit into the whole equation and funding and all that stuff. But before I lose my thought on, I wanted to bring up, so can you talk a little bit about when people are buying a hunting license, is there any kind of like segregation of funds where the hunters it's going to go into some more programs that involve hunting, or is it like hunters can be funding this fish stocking program and the hatcheries and all of that?
Yeah, so all of the license, whether it's hunting, fishing, trapping, what have you, all those, with the exception of the wildland stamp, which goes solely to land acquisition, all of that goes into our Inland Fish and Game Fund and is used to operate all of our programs.
Because I've seen comments and, some people just aren't interested in fishing, or they don't care about trout, and they'd rather see some. Can you talk about the split? I think you mentioned it, but what's the split between like hunters' fees versus fishing and sportsman fees and the revenues?
So
do you know?
I think for residents, our fishing makes up about 55%. Our hunting's about 45%.
Okay. And is it generally like 55%, is it somewhat split when you guys are deciding where to put that money, in terms of like 55% of the overall budget goes back into fishing? Do you try to do that at all, or?
That type of stuff is probably, it's not necessarily stuff I see in my position, but I have to suspect the money that comes in is just used, like I said, to operate the agency and all of our programs, whether it's, our information education programs, our archery program, school programs, anything along those lines, it's all coming out of the same pot of money.
Okay. I also saw, well, I guess one of the comments was, so have you considered, in some neighboring states do it, the Trout stamp, things like that, right? So then it can be similar to the wildland stamp, where that money that's being bought for the Trout stamp, that can go directly into the trout stocking program or the hatchery fees. If you consider doing something like that, because then you can maybe take a little bit less of the burden away from the hunting fees.
Yeah, and that was discussed. We are proposing a pheasant and quail stamp, not to pay for the pheasant and quail program, but to help offset the cost of that program, and also to give us a better idea of the sports, the hunters that are utilizing that program. But more along the lines of the trout stamp, we did discuss it quite a bit internally, and one of the things that comes up is we put trout in so many places. Pretty much everybody in the state has trout within like 5 minutes of their house. So the ability to actually really regulate and enforce a trout stamp, if you're fishing in a water body where there are trout, you'd have to tie it to, the take of trout, and it becomes difficult. States that typically have that stock trout in, a very few select number of places where it's much more easily manageable. I don't know whether we could really do it or enforce it effectively to where it would really amount to much in this state.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So where does how does the EPO where do they fall in terms of Mass Wildlife? Are they a part of Mass Wildlife? Do they get separate funding? Is it all part of your funding? What goes? Talk about the EPO a little bit.
So they are completely separate from us. At one point in time, way before my time with the agency, they were part of the same agency, and then they were split off. Their funding is completely separate from us. It's just completely separate. They do enforcement. We work with them very well and cooperatively, but they're completely separate from us.
Okay. I saw that, I think in Westboro, where their headquarters are. You guys got the nice fancy building on top of the hill, and they've got the little house on the road.
The bunker.
Yeah. All right. Chris was mentioning something that you guys probably know, like when new hire, aren't they training like 4 more? Like one thing I always hear is like there's not enough EPOs to enforce stuff.
Yeah, I heard. They come to some of the same meetings that I go to, and they go to our board meeting and give a presentation every month. And I did hear that they were in the process of bringing on 4 new officers into the staff, and I know that they brought on a few, 3 or 4 others last year as well. So that certainly helps. But I don't know in terms of their personnel numbers. That could just be keeping up with a few retirements. It might not even make up for some of their retirements. I'm not entirely sure.
We'll go back to a couple more questions from listeners. And we touched on some of this stuff, but from Let's Go, do you and Mass Wildlife support Sunday hunting and reducing setbacks for archery?
So that's another one of those like tricky questions. So basically, as state employees, we're prohibited from engaging in the legislative process, but I can say that our director, the past 2 or 3 years, has been invited to give testimony at the Joint Natural Resources and Environmental Committee, part of the legislature. So they've held, I don't know whether they're called public hearings or public informational hearings or whatever. They held one or more at our Westboro headquarters, and he has testified at those to the committee in support of Sunday hunting, in support of reducing setbacks. I believe in support of allowing changing the Crossbow bill. So that's the only way that we can, that I can say that our agency in any way can support things like that. Personally, I obviously have my own opinions, but I don't know whether I'm allowed to even publicly, say them. So
yeah. Well, do you think from an agency and like a wildlife management standpoint, if something like Sunday hunting were to be passed and allowed, that there would be some sort of that would obviously, and as a biologist or like wildlife biologist, right? That would affect the deer herd in some ways, right? Can you talk about how that type of scenario might play out? Is it going to change the buck age structure? It's going to probably increase the buck harvest.
Yeah. So, I mean, before I get into that, one thing that I will say is like reducing the setbacks and Sunday hunting.
Yep.
The biggest impediment to our ability to manage the deer population, you probably know this in much of the state, but particularly eastern Massachusetts, where we're above our deer density goals, is hunting access. So limitations on hunting access, whether it's these town ordinances or the setbacks. So anything that increases opportunity, which reducing setbacks would, opening up Sunday hunting would, doing away with some of these town ordinances or getting towns to open their land, that certainly would help our ability to manage the deer herd. With regards to Sunday hunting in particular and the impacts on deer management, so what do we know for sure? Sunday hunting, we definitely increase the harvest. Statewide, it would increase the harvest, so across the board. What that would mean, it all depends. I mean, and it's not going to be consistent across the state probably. Whereas in eastern Massachusetts, just opening up Sunday hunting, yeah, it's going to increase the harvest, but there's so much area closed to hunting, refugia for the deer.
Yeah.
Would it really impact things? Would it really impact our allocation of doe permits? Probably not, maybe, but maybe a little bit. Would it impact the buck age structure in the population? Maybe not in eastern Massachusetts. Other parts of the state, it might. So what it could mean is if you, depending on how increased that harvest would be, like with anything, we review the deer management annually. So we look at the harvest, use the population reconstruction model to determine how many doe permits we're going to issue in each zone. And if the harvest went up enough, some of the things that you could look at, you'd have to reduce the harvest of females if it's pushing the population down. So you might have to cut back on doe permits. Another possibility would be you'd shave some time off of the season. When it comes to bucks, right now we have a really, really good age structure in our buck population. So, most states would kill to have the age structure in their population that we have. So we're maybe taking, you don't typically want to take any more than, or have your harvest of bucks be any more than about 50% yearlings. And then
I know Vermont would kill for this age structure.
And then maybe 25% 2.5, or 25 to 30 2.5, and then 20 to 25 3.5 and older.
What is our age structure looking like?
We're
right now?
we're right about statewide average. I'd say we're about 50% of our harvest is yearlings. 25% probably 2.5, and 25 to it's probably 20, and then 30% 3.5. So we have a lot of mature bucks out there. So that's what people want. They want the opportunity to see or kill a mature buck. If that got thrown off, if we started taking too many yearlings, if we got up to 60, 70% or more yearlings taken out of the population, you might have to look at reducing buck harvest. So the only way that you could do that would be to cut down on either cut the season or cut down on
or drop a tag or
drop the tag. So I don't know whether, I wouldn't know without looking at in depth what another weekend day would do to the overall harvest, if it would really have an impact. But we would certainly do that analysis if it looked like Sunday hunting was going to be a reality.
Yeah. Let's talk about the doe side. So are there too many does? At Eastern Mass, there are too many does, right?
Yeah. So our deer density goals statewide is 12 to 18 deer per square mile. Western Mass and even Central Mass, we're pretty much at goal. I mean, we're still slowly trying to push up Western Mass a little bit.
And how do you analyze that from dropping piles in a particular acreage? Or
well, I mean, a lot of it ties to the population reconstruction model. So that's why our biologists are out at check stations taking the age, sex, and we take antler beam diameter and things like that. So that all goes into population reconstruction model. And the more years of data you put into it, the tighter it gets. And then that tells us where the population is and it spits out how many antlerless permits you need to issue in that particular zone to either increase, decrease, or remain stable.
And the model obviously is probably assuming, because there's so many permits that go unused, right? That's a big,
So
a big issue.
That's
right?
not. It doesn't say issue 300 doe antlerless permits
because
you want to kill 300.
does. Yeah.
I think our success rate on antlerless permits is something like 12%. So it means issue.
That'll probably go up if the permit fees go from 5 to 20. And again, although it's 5 is like extremely cheap, and 20, that's not for all the meat you get on a doe. That still sounds fair, but people aren't going to be buying surplus, as much surplus tags.
Yeah, I mean, like more taking my mass wildlife hat on. For me, I buy as many Zone 11 permits as I can. So that's typically like 4. I put in for 1 through the lottery, and then I buy 3 more, and then I usually get 1 or 2 10s because I hunt in 10 a little bit too. So I'm going to be looking, with the new license, if everything goes through as it is right now, I'm going to be looking at about 300 when I used to spend about 100, 120, which, you said it earlier, that's nothing for me for what I value hunting and the opportunity. But aside from that, like when you mentioned $5, and this is me personally speaking, but all along, ever since I've started hunting like more actively in mass when I came back from college, I've always felt like $5 was like cheap, and cheap in a bad sense. Like I value a white-tailed deer more than $5. I certainly value a black bear more than $5. So I felt like that. I do feel like that amount in a little bit is almost like devaluing or disrespect, not giving the animal the respect it desers. But that's, that's neither here nor there. It's just something that.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, $5, it's almost like, you can look at a bunch of things in this room that cost $5.
Well, I'm embarrassed to say the number of cups of coffee that I've purchased in my life that cost more than $5, but
yeah,
do like a good mocha every once in a while.
So what else can you talk about on the wildlife biology side that you think would be interesting for the layman, the average hunter to know about that we don't really think about day to day?
I don't really know. It's not really wildlife biology. It's more.
What about predation? Like, so you always hear like, coyotes kill deer. I mean, that's a fact, they kill deer.
Yep.
But what are your thoughts on like how many do they kill? Are they killing fawns predominantly? Right now, most of the deer are pretty well grown, 80 to 90 pounds plus, even this year's fawns. But what do you find with predation, and how much of it is like coyotes versus bears and like even bobcats? Do bobcats kill deer? I was just listening. I know they kill fawns. Can they kill a full-grown deer?
Yeah, they can. I mean, they're not going to typically go after the full-grown adults unless like, similar to the way coyotes won't typically go after a full-grown adult unless it's under the right circumstances or the animal's sick or injured in some way.
Yeah.
But I mean, across the country and really in the Northeast too, the studies that have been done on predation with white-tailed deer, particularly with coyotes and bears, they do not have a population limiting impact. So they're taking the surplus individuals, and especially when you get to a deer population of a certain level, and this was the same case with the pronghorn study I did out in Wyoming. When you get a deer population at a very low level, like when they had pronghorn populations at a low level, you can get into what's like referred to as a predator pit, where they can key in on them and take enough to actually keep the population from growing back up. But I mean, we have so many deer in Massachusetts, and the level of predation can't possibly be having a real negative impact. And I know, I can say that till I'm blue in the face, and you'll still have people saying, no way, they're killing all the deer, we got to get rid of the coyotes. But in reality, they're really not. They're not limiting the population. Yes, they are killing deer. They're killing fawns. They're killing some adult deer, but it's not impacting the population.
One of the arguments I've had, when people bring up, and I don't have anything against coyote hunting. It's part of, if people want to do it and it's legal, like go and do it. But I've mentioned it in a few podcasts. I haven't killed a coyote. I just don't know if I could personally, like how I would feel about it. I'm not eating. I like to eat what I kill. Yeah. But one thing I've always thought about is like we always talk about as hunters and conservationists that we need to keep the deer population in check. And if we know that the deer population is it's exploded. It's way higher than what 12 to 18 is what we want per square mile, and in the Eastern it can be up to 50 in some places, right?
Oh, even higher, yeah.
And even higher. And it might even, I know some towns where it's definitely higher than that. Then having coyotes there actually helps us towards our goal, right? Having other predators in there taking deer, if we really think about it, it helps to.
Yeah, they certainly serve a role in the ecosystem, and again, they're not taking enough deer to really make a difference, but it's not harming anything for sure.
Yeah, I can't remember where this was, but there was a study where they collared, they had some deer collars on. They were studying movement, buck movement, I believe it was. And they studied them for years, and they had this one buck, and they had all these data points that showed where he was, different times of the year, different times of the day, through GPS, and eventually the deer, he stopped moving, so they know that he's probably dead. They got to go in and find out what happened, and it was a coyote that killed that particular. I mean, not a coyote, a bobcat that killed that particular deer. Yeah,
I think I just saw it today on one of the. I think it was on one of the Facebook sites. They posted a video of a bobcat sneaking up and taking down a deer. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, and there's that famous picture of a bobcat on somebody got on a trail cam. I don't know where that was from, but the bobcat was right on his neck, And I've heard one guy I had on here a couple weeks ago. I haven't released this podcast yet, but he killed I think a 45-pound bobcat. That's a big cat.
Yeah,
that's bigger than the average coyote out there. So.
Oh yeah. In spite of what people constantly say. But.
Yeah, people think. I told my wife after he said that, I was like, yeah, there's a bobcat, 45 pounds this guy got, and that's bigger than coyote. She goes, what? That's bigger than a coyote? Yeah, coyotes are 25 pounds,
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about some DCR properties. Are you able to talk about, are there any that are potentially coming on board for hunters that aren't currently available? Are you able to talk about that?
I mean, I'm not entirely privy to which exact parcels or properties that they're working on. I know ones that, I can speak to my district really. I know that Wampatuck State Park in the Norwell, Hingham, Cohasset area has long been one that's hunters have been asking about. The community around there is overrun with deer, and I actually, you mentioned the deer pellet counts earlier,
yep.
And we do those every year, and I did a bunch of them. It was a perfect COVID project because, I drive my truck to Wampatuck State Park, and then I just walk in mile-long transects through the woods counting deer pellets. And the deer density in there and the amount of deer sign I saw in there was unbelievable. So that's one that I know we've been working on, but it's an interesting one.
How big is that property, do you know?
It's got to be, maybe 5,000 acres.
Oh, wow.
I'm completely, I could be way off.
Yeah.
It's a big piece of woods.
And you can't currently hunt it.
You can't hunt it, but it's one of these weird ones that actually has a regulation. Most of them just say you can't hunt these properties, and it's a list. Yep. Wampatuck has a regulation that says you cannot hunt deer. And the reason being is back when Wampatuck was first created, there was no deer anywhere in Eastern Mass or on the South Shore, very few. And that was one of the few areas where there was a decent little deer population, so they wanted to protect it. And now it's completely overrun.
What would you estimate the deer population is in there right now?
Oh, it's easy 50, if not, portions of it. It's going to range a little bit around, but I think I remember when our deer biologist sent the data back down that it was easily 50, if not upwards of 70.
And what was Blue Hills at the time? Do you remember that?
Blue Hills, portions of it were over 100 deer per square mile.
And what is it now? Do you know? Has the
I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to look, but there has been pretty significant, not huge significant declines, but a downward trend in the density there based on the last estimates that they did.
There's probably some nice mature bucks in Wampatuck right now.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and like there were in the Blue Hills. I got drawn the first year that they allowed archery hunting. So they had archery and shotgun going at the same time. And I got to hunt 4 days. 2 of the days it rained. It was terrible, but I still went anyways. And I think over the course of the 4 days, and I didn't hunt full days because I shot deer too, I saw something like 96 deer.
Really?
And I shot a buck the first day. It wasn't it was like a 5-pointer, and I was just trying to get deer out of there. And after that, I saw like 7 like slammer bucks came through. One of them came like right under me at like 5 yards.
No
and
way,
I just had
really?
just had to watch it. But it was unbelievable, the number of deer, because you had the shotgun hunters in the middle, and just by nature, and it happens to me too, you have a gun in your hand, you can't sit still very long, and they started getting up, moving around. Once they got
deer everywhere.
It was just like cows just pouring out of the property from the shotgun area into the archery area.
Wow. So you saw seven big bucks.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's crazy. I lived across the street from Blue Hills for years. I was living in Quincy before we moved out here, and I'd go for walks over there. I actually didn't see very many deer, and I was trying to get off trail and look for deer a lot of times. I didn't see very many, so I was just wondering if those estimates were actually accurate.
It was certainly
probably in pockets too, right?
Oh yeah, because I did some. I worked the hunt too, and we would go through and walk through some of the areas to try and push deer into where the hunters were. And some of the spots, there's no because the deer have browsed everything. There's no understory.
I definitely noticed that.
So the deer were all off in the peripheries around the neighborhoods and stuff, and they'd come up in and filter up in at night. But the Foul Meadow area, which was a lot of swamp and around the Neponset River, that's where I hunted that year.
I was going to ask. I couldn't remember what it was called.
It was unbelievable. The deer sign and the number of deer was crazy.
What do you think the biggest buck you saw that day was?
That one that came right close to me. I mean, he was a mainframe 10, and he had like kickers going off both sides.
Yeah.
But he was, body wise, he wasn't the hugest deer I've ever seen, but he had a huge rack.
Do you shed hunt at all?
Yeah, a little bit. As much as I can. I've been taking the kids out more. They like to walk around the woods, and it's kind of like an Easter egg hunt for them.
Wampatuck's probably pretty good for that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found a couple up in the Blue Hills, and I found 2 this year. I was doing prescribed fire over on the vineyard, and after we burned through, I had said to one of my guys, I'm going to find a shed, and I looked up, and there was a little 5-pointer sitting out there, and then I found one that broke off when we were doing a property survey in another spot.
I went out today just for like an hour. I finally found, so a couple weeks ago, I found a nice matching set. I went and checked a camera and looked, going through my video. I always put my cameras on videos. Do you use cameras?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't use it. I have 3 of them, and I same thing. I always have them on videos just because I feel like I get more.
Yeah, you learn more.
And I just like, see some cool stuff on the videos.
Yeah, so. I had two bucks. They were probably both 2.5-year-olds. But nice, like 8-pointers. They were sparring, and it was early February or mid February, and so I'm sitting there going, I'm gonna see the antlers fall off during this spar, aren't I? I didn't, but the next video, one of them was standing there bald, and the other one still had antlers. So I was like, I know right where those are. I walked up, and there was a nice matching set.
Nice.
And today I found a spike horn, one spike antler.
That's a tough thing to find, though.
It was, yeah. He's a big spike, though. It comes around and curves.
Oh yeah,
curves right around. But
yeah, I did a bunch of shed hunting when I was out west too, and that was a lot of fun.
You can find elk, or depending where you are.
Yeah, it was mostly elk and mule deer, and then I'd go down in the river bottoms, and where there was whitetails and find whitetails too.
So have you gone out and hunted elk or muleys, or what were you doing out west?
When I was doing my master's out there, so I
yeah.
hunted like crazy when I was out there because I knew I'd never get the opportunity to do it as easily and pay resident fees.
Right.
So, and then when I came back east, I took a job with the federal government up in New Hampshire, and I hadn't defended my thesis yet. So before I left, I bought all my tags and permits before I came back east. So then I took a trip back that fall and did like a 5 species in a week hunt. That was pretty cool.
So did you get an elk out there, or?
Yeah, I shot 3 elk while I was out there.
Awesome. With a bow?
No, all with a rifle.
Yep.
I bow hunted for him. I had a couple close calls, but never closed the deal.
One thing I wanted to ask you about while we're on like wildlife biology, bears, black bears. What are you seeing for black bear encroachment into like some of these eastern towns? They're
definitely coming. I mean, in the past 5 to 10 years, we've had 2 or 3 instances in southeastern Mass with a bear coming down. So we had that crazy one that went down onto the Cape, if you remember that.
Well, no, what's that story?
So it came, I don't remember the year specifically, but we started getting reports of a bear in like the Plainville, Attleboro area, and then down in like Dighton, and then all of a sudden it was in like Middleborough, Rochester. And then it went off the radar around the time when you would expect a bear to den. Mm-hmm. And then the following spring it popped back up, and then it kind of just eventually beelined it east, and it was in South Plymouth, kind of near the canal. And then the next day we got calls about it on the Cape.
No way.
The thing ended up, obviously we got calls like every 4 or 5 hours about the thing. It happened to be like the first weekend in June, and I go over the vineyard every year for a catch and release fly fishing striper tournament. I'm over there and my phone starts blowing up, and I'm like, oh my God, the thing was inside the enclosure of the Provincetown Monument.
It got all the way to the tip?
It went all the way down to the tip of Provincetown. And of course, everybody's just freaking out about the thing. And I'm over on the vineyard, and my biologist is like calling me, like, what do I do? And they ended up we told them just leave it be, let it, kind of haze it off in the direction. And then like another week or two later, we ended up putting out traps to try and catch it, just because people were going and looking for it. It was going to end up dead is what was going to happen, because either somebody was going to push the limits with it, or, something was going to happen where it got into trouble. So, we normally don't go and try and trap and move a bear unless it's a real issue bear. So we went and the environmental police, we got reports. We ended up getting darts into it, and we moved it to Douglas. So my biologist and I, we got the bear down in Wellfleet, brought it in the bear trap. We slept at my office in the truck with the bear in the back of the truck for a few hours because we were exhausted.
Yeah.
And then we drove out, like, while it was still dark, out to Douglas and let it go in the Douglas State Forest area. 2 weeks later, the friggin' thing shows up in Brookline, up a tree.
No way.
Something in that bear, it's just...
Did you guys tag it or put a GPS on it?
Yeah, we put ear tags in it. It was probably a 2.5-year-old male, so we don't typically call our males because they grow so fast it can become an issue. Mm-hmm. But we ear tagged it, and for some reason that bear's DNA, it was going east. So it's happened before, like with the mountain lion that came from the Black Hills and ended up in Connecticut, road killed. It just had something in it to go east.
I didn't hear about that either. Let's talk about that one. But
so the EPOs, I wasn't involved in that one because it was up there. They captured that one, then they brought him out to like the Quabbin, and then there's enough bear. Like originally we put him where it was like the leading edge of where we thought there was a decent bear density. So as a male, it was kind of breeding season. We thought he'd stick around.
Yeah, maybe he was just looking for another population of bears.
Yeah. So then they stuck him in Quabbin, and I
can't believe he went. I mean, yeah, there's hundreds of miles, like from I think Attleboro to the Provincetown tip. It's gonna be. I don't know. That's weird.
It's crazy.
That's weird.
Yeah, some woman wrote a book about it, a little kid's book, The Cape Cod Bear. So.
With the ear tagging, can you follow that? Like, is there GPS involved in that?
No,
or it's
the ear tags that we do on the males is just it says like MDFW.
So if somebody
and a number, so that if that bear, like we typically will put it on like the males anyway, so we know them. But then if we end up having a problem bear, and they catch it, like some bears getting into a house or something like that, and they trap it, ear tag it, move it. That bear does something again, we know it's that bear, and it's probably a bear that's going to get euthanized, something along those lines. But we're not so concerned about what the males are doing. We want to know what the females are doing. So we're collaring females. So we're right now in the process of going into dens and, taking the female. We have a bunch of females collared, so we take them out. We get the age and sex and condition of the cubs. And then we can follow how the bears produce young, how they survive as they move east into more suburban habitats.
So do you have any that are collared that you've seen that you actually have GPS locations on them that have been moving east and you've seen it year after year?
Well, I mean, we've seen a little bit of that, but most of the time when we're collaring the females, they're kind of in their home range. They're established. It's the younger ones that'll, the males will be the ones that make the big dispersals, so we don't necessarily have that captured as much, but the females, like her offspring, they'll disperse, but if it's a female, they might not disperse very far. They might have a home range that overlaps with the female. So they're looking at kind of the cub production and survival as they move into different habitats. And then we're also working with a graduate student. I don't know if it's a master's or PhD we're putting out bait traps. So we put a bait out and then we put barbed wire around it to get hair as they go in and out so that we can work towards getting a better handle on the bear density in the state through mark recapture.
That's smart. So what happened with this mountain lion? Where did that come from?
So I don't know if it was 3 or 4 years ago, maybe. I might be a little bit off on that, but eventually it got road killed in Connecticut down near like Greenwich. Mm-hmm. And through DNA and existing DNA signatures that they have on the Black Hills population, they were able to type it back to the Blue Hill. Did I say Blue Hills?
No, you said Black Hills
okay,
first.
Black Hills in South Dakota. And
wow.
And then, but through that, they were also able to, through some other reports and sightings they had seen, kind of track it along the way. Like it showed up in New York, and then there was a potential sighting in Massachusetts. But basically, there was a trail of sightings that led back to the Black Hills.
So is the Black Hills or South Dakota? Is that where is that kind of the eastern edge of the range from from sustaining population?
No,
right now?
we have them east of there, but I'm not sure off the top of my head how far east the existing current leading edge of the population is, but that's certainly like a unheard of dispersal distance for an animal. But that probably ties a little bit back to evolution, and some of these animals, in order to find a new territory, there's some percentage of them are just going to do that, just going to be wired to go off.
Even deer, yeah. Some of the studies I've read where there's just one, you have one deer that'll just go on a 30-mile jaunt sometimes.
Yeah.
Like 40, 50, one buck,
Yeah.
But then he comes back, he'll come back to his home range. All right. So do you guys get like mountain lion sightings all the time? People like writing in, and I know there's a lot of misidentifying bobcats as mountain lions.
Yeah, and we get them. I get a handful a year. We've been sent pictures. We've been sent pictures of actual mountain lions, and every single one that I'm aware of, if you do like a reverse Google search, or you try to pin down the location a little bit with the person, then it's like, oh, it's my brother's cousin's sister's uncle that gave me that, or But we do have reports, and 90% of the time they're, either a track or just an anecdotal report. I saw something that was tan and had a long tail, and never been anything really credible. I mean, most of the time the tracks are either a dog or, a bobcat. Pictures are usually a bobcat. And then the other sighting reports that we get are generally, I think they're probably coyotes, and even maybe a mangy coyote, because a mangy coyote can look really weird. There have been, I think, 2 confirmed cases of evidence of mountain lions in Massachusetts, and they were both, I think, out in the Quabbin area. There was like a confirmed beaver kill in Cache, and then a confirmed scat back in, I think, the 80s. And that was suspected to be a
roamer,
an escaped, illegal pet, but it was never seen or heard from, never confirmed, like a carcass or anything like that. So
you guys get Bigfoot reports?
Nope. No, none of those.
Yeah, that's good.
Bear reports too, but after that Cape thing, I don't take them with a grain of salt as much as I used to, because it kind of shows you that anything can happen. But most of the time, when we have bears here, at least at first, when people aren't used to them, when we've had bears here the 2 or 3 times, those things are showing up all the time. They're getting into trash, they're getting into bird feeders, they're crossing roads. So we know they're there. They don't go more than 2 or 3 days without us hearing or getting pictures of them. They make the news. So when they do get here in some numbers, it's going to be interesting, and then it'll die down, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, that will be interesting. I mean, especially eastern part of Mass with a lot of recreators out, and small amounts of woods. That definitely going to be interesting. You're going to get a lot of people who think they're cute and fuzzy, and want to invite them into their yard too.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of habitat for them. in spite of it being pretty suburban, there's, Plymouth, Bristol County, there's a ton of, big habitat for bears, and they're gonna come.
Hockomock Swamp, that's a place that's always intrigued me. I'm sure, they can get in there and live in there.
There's Bigfoots in there, you know.
Yeah, and there's a couple documentaries about that place. Some strange stuff happening there, but all right. So let's talk a little bit about hunting, man, and how you hunt and your philosophy on hunting. First of all, do you like mornings or evenings better?
For deer, I like both. Morning.
I used to ask everybody this, but I haven't done it in a while. But
the morning. I guess if I had to pick, I like the morning better. In part because I really enjoy getting in. I primarily tree stand hunt.
Yep.
And I enjoy getting in the tree when it's dark out and sitting there, and then just listening to the woods wake up and like the first robin that starts chirping, and then just all that. I enjoy that more than the evening, because you don't get the same experience.
Yeah,
and then
it always feels like way worse when it's getting darker on you as opposed to it waking up.
Yeah, you have something more to look forward to in the morning, because it's like, even if you don't see anything, you can still hunt.
Yeah,
as long as you want. Whereas the evening, I don't know.
Yeah, it always feels
both,
lonelier for me in the like as the sun's going down and like you're the only one around, and it's like that feels lonelier than going in. Some weird, just a weird thing.
Yeah.
So what'd you get? Did you get any deer last year?
Yeah, I got a number of deer. I think I got seven deer last year.
2 bucks, 5 does. Yep. What kind of what were the bucks like? You got any good stories to tell about them?
Yeah, it's funny. Well, one of the bucks I got during shotgun season, I shot a buck and a doe together. And he was a nice 2.5-year-old 8-pointer. Nothing really too exciting about that one. The other one that's an interesting story is I hung a new stand in a spot that I hunt in a different tree, and I was hunting. It was in the morning, and I was walking in, and I could hear deer pawing around and moving around. I knew it was deer. You can tell. So then I was like, they were not in between me and the stand, but where I was kind of concerned about walking through there and spooking them off. So I watched. Do you watch the Hunting Public?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so I love watching those and another number of the other ones, and how much they hunt on the ground. So I decided, I'm like, all right, I'm going to try and sound like a deer. So I pretended to scrape on the ground, and I just walked like heel toe all the way to stand, grunting occasionally, and I barely got in my stand and got settled. And I heard a deer coming, and it was this giant 8-pointer that I've had on camera. And he came right under me, and it was a steep angle shot. And I thought I had everything perfect. And based on, I shot, I knew I hit him, but, he ran off maybe 60 yards and then stopped, and he started doing that tail wag thing where I'm like, okay, he's going to tip over any second. And then he just wagged his tail and walked off. So I didn't know what to do. The blood didn't look great, so I left, and I came back with my district biologist that works for me, and he helped me track, and we found where it bedded down like 6 times. Blood wasn't great, and I kind of just, we searched and searched, ran out of blood.
So he was right under your stand.
He was like 8 yards.
Yeah.
It was a steep downward angle, and so I was like heartbroken. I hate wounding anything, and you just have that sick to your stomach feeling like you wounded the thing, and I didn't know if he was dead or alive. And I think it was like a week later, I was in the same stand, and here he comes trotting down the trail like nothing ever happened to him. He came the opposite direction he came from, but came almost the same exact spot, same steep angle, and I shot him. And then I saw when he ran off, I could see blood pouring out, and I tracked up on him and, gave him like a half an hour. I kind of knew things went well. It was bubbles in the blood, and came up on him and found him. And I looked at the wound from I think it was like 5 or 6 days earlier, and it had gone in perfect. And I don't know if it glanced off his shoulder blade or the way he moved, but the arrow almost took like a right angle and came out the base of his neck, like the side of his neck. It didn't hit anything vital at all. So he would have survived, but, so I got a second chance on him, and, one of the nicer deer that I've ever killed. So
Awesome.
It was nice. And again, it's the whole thing about, hunting's not a guarantee at any point, but when you shoot something, you practice, you want it to be clean and quick, and it killed me that happened, but it was nice to close it out and actually kill the animal and know it wasn't gonna die a long, slow death or suffer. So
yeah, that's the best kind of closure you can get.
Yeah.
On that. Did you age him?
Yeah, he was 4.5.
Okay, yeah. Nice. And just a big mainframe 8.
Yeah, he wasn't. He's not so tall, but he was really probably the widest deer I've shot. But his tines weren't that tall, so and I don't really. I hunt for meat more than bone, but he's probably the type of deer that if he made it to 6 or 7 years old, he probably would have been unbelievable score wise, but that's not what drives me. So.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And it's funny you mentioned hunting public. The other day I was watching them again, and they put out so much content. I haven't seen all their videos, so I still every once in a while I'm like, let me go find a new one. And
go back to the 2018.
My God, even from this last season, and I think Zach's his name, right? The guy with the long hair.
Yeah, the guy who looks like Kenny G.
Yeah. And sounds like Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah.
He's I like watching him, and he's they this particular one I was watching, they're making so much noise, and they're rattling and sounding like two bucks fighting, breaking stuff, and it really it just makes total sense to do that. But I never thought about it until these guys are kind of making that popular. I was always trying to sneak through the woods and be as quiet as possible, but really if it's unless it's an extremely silent day, rainy, wet leaves, whatever, you're going to be making noise, you might as well imitate a deer.
Yeah.
And so these guys they were pitched up on top of a ridge, I think in Ohio, and making all kinds of noise, and this buck comes in beelines it in. He's running, he's full head of steam, he's looking for the fight, and he gets within 3 yards or something of him, and he didn't have time to grab his bow. He had his bow he was facing this way, and he didn't expect it to happen so fast.
And it comes right in front of him, and then it sees him and blows, and
and it just had me thinking. It's I really should, although this year I want to get into a saddle and learn the whole saddle game, but I should hunt on the ground more. I mean, you're mobile, it's exciting on the ground, and these guys have a ton of success hunting on the ground, doing that stuff. I mean, why not throw that into the repertoire? Mm-hmm. So I think I'm going to try to do a little more of that this year.
Yeah, I do want to try the saddle thing too. It's, because I got into bear hunting in the past 5 years, and just having the ability to be more mobile, and it just seems lighter to carry all the stuff than lugging around a stand.
Yeah.
But
that's what I keep hearing.
It's an initial investment at first.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's you'd think it'd be cheap or cheaper than stands, but it's not. It's definitely not. What do you have to say to? Do you have anything you want to close out with to the listeners? From Mass Wildlife standpoint on the whole fee discussion and the agency and how we're looking for the future.
No, I mean, with the license, with the finance issue and stuff, I just encourage people to tune into the listening sessions that our director's going to do. The information that I gave here, he goes more in depth in it. So to search out the information, and this whole issue has kind of pointed out that not a lot of hunters pay attention to what's going on with the agency and regulations and stuff. So a simple way to do that is to just keep track of the Fisheries and Wildlife Board meetings. So anything we really significant that we're going to do, we put out minutes on those. They're noticed in advance, and even now we're doing them. Those are all done via Zoom.
Yeah,
so
everything's accessible now.
Easy to get on, but search out the information. It can get disheartening or a little bit frustrating as a employee of the agency, because I know how hard my guys work to manage the land and provide the access opportunities, and it's tough sometimes to read the comments on some of the things about this agency doesn't know what they're doing, they mismanage this, the deer population isn't what they say, that type of stuff is tough. But to to just encourage people to search out the information. And like I said earlier, call me. I mean, call our director. Got an email. Can I have like 5 minutes of your time to talk about the licensing issue? And he called him and talked to him. It's like you're gonna get that level of service if you call and talk to us. So I love talking to the public. I love interacting with hunters and anglers, and we're here to serve the public and serve hunters and anglers. So we're just trying to keep the agency doing what we're doing through this license increase so that we can eventually move to another funding model. But we've relied on sportsmen. I'm proud as a sportsman that, the sportsmen created the Pittman-Robertson Act. That didn't come through the legislatures. Sportsmen created that and asked for that. They wanted to support conservation. And this, as difficult it is as it is to talk about a license increase, and it's certainly not something that any of us got into this career path to do, was talk about how much we're going to charge people to hunt and fish.
Yeah.
But it's a necessary evil. We need to do it. We haven't done it in far too long. So as shocking as it might seem, it's been 26 years, and it's a lot has changed, and we do a lot more now. So it's not trying to make money or buy, they're going to buy new trucks and raise salaries and all that stuff. It's like, that's not the case. We're just trying to continue to provide the high level of public service that we have been all these years. So.
Yeah, and I should mention, as you're talking about the level of service, on one of the threads I posted online, somebody had mentioned, that sign in the town, and that particular, and you were right on it. You were right there answering. You followed up on it. I think you even visited that property that day. Yeah, and followed up on it and took action on it, and that's. Again, I think you'll be able to expect that across the whole agency, no matter who you're talking to. We're all wanting to better opportunity. Yeah, right? And
I sometimes I don't know the line with that on Facebook and stuff. I haven't really known how much I should put myself out there, because people could, I'm on there in my personal time, but I want to continue to serve the public, and when I see things on there that is misinformation and stuff, I usually try and just point people in the right direction so that they can get the facts before they kind of react. But that's part of, I consider it a little bit part of doing my job, because that's how a lot of hunters and anglers interact and get their information nowadays. So when I see something on there, I'm going to try and help out.
Yeah, and hopefully, this podcast, the one I had with Chris last week, there's a lot of really good information, and it clears up a lot of the misconceptions. And I'm sure I'll get some comments and emails wanting to do follow-ups, but in the future, you're always going to be welcome to come back and do more podcasts, and keep lines of communication open. And how many board meetings? Is it quarterly board meeting?
They're every month.
Every month.
Yeah, so okay. I would imagine. I don't know how long it'll take to get to a public hearing or what type of information will be at the next board meeting, but the agenda's usually posted and they're noticed in advance. So, and they usually set the next 2 months board meeting at each board meeting, so you know when they're coming up.
Yeah, so I think everybody should tune in. I tuned into the Hopkinton one the other day, so that they were offering anybody who wanted to speak could speak about the bylaw amendments and stuff, although they actually kind of canceled that because they just dropped it all together and said they're going to agree to revisit it in the future and not affect hunters. They didn't want to, the whole point wasn't to affect hunters, so they're going to rewrite it. And but it is easy to tune into that kind of stuff right now with Zoom and being home, and this is what we live and breathe. So tune in and make sure you know what's happening. I'll find out when the next board meeting is and kind of share it through the Hunt Suburbia socials and stuff. And cool. Yeah, just encourage everybody to do that, and shoot an email to Jason or to Mass Wildlife with any feedback that you have on anything, regulations, price increases. We're all in it together. So, hey, I really appreciate you coming on, man.
No, appreciate it.
That was great. And we'll do another one soon.
Cool.
Heron Hill, the official wine of the Hunt Suburbia podcast. Go to www.heronhill.com and use code HS5 for an additional 5% off your first purchase. If you're going back as a repeat buyer, you'll get their volume discounts, and just make sure your first time you're using code HS5 so that they know that we sent you. Thanks for the support. Thanks for listening to the Hunt Suburbia podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. We're going to release an episode every single Sunday throughout the season, throughout the entire year, and we will possibly be releasing some bonus episodes here and there throughout the week as people, come in freshly off a bow kill and tell their stories. We hope that happens throughout the season. There might be weeks where you get 2 or 3 bonus episodes. You might not get one for a couple of weeks, but there will be some bonus episodes. But you can count on us every single Sunday to have a new interview on throughout the season. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week. Big bucks I've been dreaming often, every night till I'm in a coffin. Vermont woods to the burbs of Boston, I'm looking for a tree to get lost in. Crisp mornings, little dust in the snow. Quality time, just me and my bow. Fall evenings, I know just where to go for some quality times for me and my bow. It's just me and my